Hi folks, Robert Maddox, owner of Sin City Reel Repair and Restoration, and today we're going to have a short video about how to clean and maintain your bait casting reels. And today I want to use Piscifun's new Spark Pro 80. It's a fascinating little reel. I hope you can get a good look at it there. It's a finesse reel, and finesse reels need a certain kind of TLC. That's what we're going to do today, so stand by. I hope you enjoy the video. Before you get started in cleaning and maintaining your reel, one of the things that you want to do is make sure you have a supply of reel oil on hand. I don't have a specific recommendation for an oil. I always say if you have oil, use oil, but I know that some are better than others, and I know this from experience. So just to give you some examples, Pin Precision, we have a synthetic pin here. This is fantastic oil. It's very affordable and it works. It comes in two different viscosities. Of course, there's Lucas reel oil, outstanding oil. But if you don't have any of these fancy reel oils or oils designed specifically for a reel, use any oil you can get your hands on for now. Eventually you'll want to upgrade into a more appropriate oil, but 3-in-1, while it is very thin, will do the job to prevent corrosion, and that is the #1 purpose that we use the oil. Sometimes it's helpful to have a reel cleaner. Now, this is Pin Reel Cleaner. It's very affordable. What it does is has an oil-based cleaner, and it puts a heck of a shine on old reels and old parts. It protects while it cleans. Is it always the right cleaner? No, because it's a very weak cleaner. So if a reel isn't too bad, it'll work fine. But when a reel has really got some crud built up over a period of months and months or even years, here in the shop, a weak combination of water and simple green. Another important element of cleaning and maintaining reels is grease. Here in the shop, we use multiple different types of grease depending on the reel. None of them are expensive. Let me go over these quickly. Super Lube. This is a very light synthetic grease. It's fantastic and very small, especially like spinning reels where the components are really tight. There's not much room in that body. Too much grease can be a deterrent to proper function in a spinning reel. So anyway, this is a great grease and we recommend it. But for some, I much prefer the Lucas Red and Tacky. This is a very sticky grease. Very little is needed. Grease is often misunderstood in the fishing reels. How to use it, how much to use it, where to put it, how to apply it. We're going to cover all that in this video. So let me tell you, this is a fantastic everyday use grease. It's very affordable, and there's more grease here than you could use in a lifetime. Stay Lube Marine Grease, okay? Stay Lube Marine Grease, and this is a waterproof grease, and it's a fantastic grease. It's an aluminum-based grease, and I use it a lot, especially in salt water, but we use it for other purposes too. It's a fantastic grease. Now, another grease we use here is Black Molly grease. Now, it's a rather expensive grease, but it's a fantastic grease and it has its purposes. And we can talk about more specifically about grease in another video. But before we get started in cleaning and maintaining, it's important to know that you need to have a supply of grease on hand. So now that we've covered both oil and grease, one of the things that we want to do now is make sure that we have the cleaning materials handy. We here at the shop prefer to use these small round cotton. They have a smooth side here, and you can see they have kind of a puffed side. But if you don't have these, that's fine. Paper towels. Just take a paper towel, fold it in half, and tear it into small squares. And these will work just fine. The other thing that is very handy to have that you might have around the house is these Q-tips. Q-tips are great, and we'll cover where they work and where you probably shouldn't use them, because they're not always the right thing to use everywhere throughout the reel. So one of the first things that we want to do is, once we have a reel in our hands, we want to remove this non-handle side plate. To do that on this particular Piscifun Spark Pro, we do it by this little lever right here. Let me point it out to you. You can see it there, okay? Right there. And we just slide that forward, like that, okay? Now the reel, this side plate, just comes right off and exposes the magnetic braking system. We can just turn the reel and slide out the spool, just like that. All right, we'll talk more about that spool in a moment. For now, we're just going to sit this reel aside and move on to this side plate. Now, the side plate, as you can see, this is the mechanism here for the side plate. There we go. Now you can see it right there. And you can see when I move it, how it moves it. That releases that side plate. So one of the things that we want to do, we want to check the magnetic brakes to make sure they're clean and there's no debris on those. They look fine in this case. And we want to go ahead and we want to put a little lube. There you go. I think you can see those little lugs right there is one of them. We're going to put a little light grease on those lugs, okay? Never glob grease on. We paint grease on by using these small crafting paint brushes. I can get the grease where I need it in the amount that I need it without over greasing, because that is a problem. So this allows us to be very targeted and very specific in the location that we put the grease, as you're about to see. Going back to the side plate again, and the lugs that we talked about, what we're going to do is we take a very small amount of grease and we just barely paint it on those lugs on this, see? And that will allow us to get this on and off a little easier. It also prevents this side plate from seizing up if the reel expands in the heat of the day. Now, once you have that lubed up, you'll note that there's a bearing that sits inside this plate. That bearing supports the drive shaft. Here, can you see that gear? All right. So there's two things that we want to do here. One, if you're just maintaining, you just want to take your oil, and these applicators can be found on Amazon. They are outstanding, and we use them here in the shop, and I recommend them. And what I can do is I can just put that here and put one tiny drop of oil right there. Now, you'll notice that oil will go right inside the bearing. That's all you need. That's all you need to put in there. The more oil you put in your bearing, the more you slow that bearing down. You put your one drop of oil in here, and this is good to go. We'll set this aside. Now, when I pick up the spool, you'll note that this spool is a finesse spool. It's a shallow spool. And this bearing we've already dealt with over here. But now we say, well, normally you see a bearing on this side, but there is no bearing here. On this reel, Piscifun has put that bearing inside here, and you look careful, you can actually see the bearing sits in there, and that supports the pinion gear, which makes this reel exceptionally smooth even with the spool out. It supports the pinion gear. It's a great idea. A lot of people call that a super free bearing because of that smoothness that you feel right there. All right, so we're going to get to that, but at this point now we're going to work on the handle. For now, we're done on the non-handle side, and we're going to move to the handle side of the reel. So what we're going to do first is we're going to remove this handle, and we're going to do that by using a screwdriver here on the handle retaining nut, and you'll need a reel wrench in this case, but I use this one a lot. And you just sit it on there and loosen that up and remove the handle nut. And you can just remove the handle. Now take care at this part, there is a small washer that sits here. Just slide that off. And we have the handle. It's a carbon handle, it's very light. So we're going to remove these covers, and the best thing to remove those covers to get to those bearings is just a simple washer. And it works like a charm. You can just remove these caps. Now you want to be careful removing these caps. These are a soft aluminum and you don't want to mar them up. Inside there's a screw. If you can see it there. There you go. And we're just going to remove that. Okay. There we go. So we remove that, and we'll be able to pull this EVA foam handle off, exposing the bearing. All right, there we go. So there's the post of the handle. We'll talk more about that in a second. And there's the handle. Now, you see here, there's the screw. And if you look inside there, you see that bearing. We're just going to take our oil. We put 1 drop of oil on that bearing. Okay. Now we come over here to the post. Here sits a small bearing. Take your oil. We're going to put 1 small drop on that bearing. Now we're not done here. We're going to take our paintbrush and cut a nice, very, 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 very light coat of grease. Remember, one of the biggest reasons we use grease in a fishing reel is not for lubrication. It's to prevent corrosion. All right? And what you don't want is for this shaft to eventually corrode, and you'll really struggle getting this off. So we've oiled our bearing at the bottom. We've oiled the bearing at the top of the knob. We will place this back in. All you do is just make sure that bearing is properly seated, and you can screw that knob right back in. It's easy. Repeat the same procedure on the second knob. Once you get the EVA knob back on, as you can see, the screw is in and it spins freely. Take your paintbrush on the cap, go ahead and put some grease on those aluminum threads, and it'll screw right back in. Very easy. The washer works good for this, or even a dime, by the way, is all you need to do this. That's all you need to worry about. Again, you want to make sure that you repeat that procedure on both sides, okay? We move on to the drive shaft. So it's very important when you work on the drive shaft that you place everything in order, especially if you haven't done this very much and you're not used to this. So we take our spacer there and sit down. Now you have your star drag. Okay, I can't see. Okay, there you go. And just set your star drag aside. Now oftentimes this has to be cleaned, and this is where our pads come in. We want to make sure that we clean all in between there and get all of that dirt out of there. Your fingers and touching fish leave a lot of dirt, and that needs to be taken care of. We'll just set it aside for now, and we're here. Let's take our tension knob off and set it aside. Set that aside. We have our compression washers for the drag. These are the compression washers for the drag. Can you see that really good? It's real important that when you take these off, that when you put them back on the reel, that you don't put them so they lie flat together. See? That is not what you want at all. They have to be opposing. So flip it over, and so they don't lay flat with each other. That's very important because it'll mess up your drag if you don't. We're down. We've removed everything we can remove from the drive shaft at this point. So we're at the point now where we have to remove this side cover. Okay? To remove this side cover, you'll note that we have one screw here. We have one in the back there. We have one, let's see, right there on the outside of the reel. All right, 4 screws take this off. Now, we don't know if all these screws are the same size or if these screws are a specific size for the location that they're used on this cover. So we kind of have a way that we always remove them, so we always know how to put them back in and we don't mess that up. So I'm going to show that to you now. Okay, so we've loosened the screws on the handle side plate, and you can see there's 1, 2, and 3, and that's how we label those. 1, the lowest, 2, and 3 there is the highest. All right, and we pull those out, and on our towel, we face them in, right? Because they face into the reel. Okay, 1, and 2, and 3. That's how we do it. And the one on the top, that faces the opposite direction of the other 3 and faces out on the towel. I hope you understand how I did that. We have the 3 inside screws, 1, 2, and 3, and as you can see, they are indeed different sizes. So it's important to make sure you keep them straight. And then we have the screw that sits on the outside of the side plate here facing in. It's just the system that we do it. You can use any system you like, but this system works for us. Okay, now let's get this side plate cover off and take a look at what's inside. Removing the side plate, one of the first things that I note is there's a bearing here to support the top of the drive shaft here. It's a great idea. Now this is a finesse reel, that's what it was designed for, but when you take a bearing and put it at the top of the drive shaft, you're allowing that drive shaft to stay rigid under load. So if this small finesse reel hooks into a 20-pound striper, that bearing will keep this aluminum drive shaft in line with the gears. And that's important, because under load, if these gears become misaligned even a little bit, it'll wear the teeth down or damage the teething of the gears, right? But we have to manage that. So let's take a look at that right now. So let's pop this bearing out. That's a large bearing. You get a load of that right there. It's a good large bearing. And underneath it, you have the anti-reverse bearing. So let's take a look at all of that, okay? First, let's service this bearing. In this case, it's a new reel, and we're aware of its maintenance history, okay? And set that aside for right now. And we pull this out here. And what you have inside there, as you can see, is the anti-reverse bearing. If your reel is dirty and you really need to get it cleaned, this is an important bearing to make sure that we keep clean. So what I like to do is I'll take a Q-tip to make sure that it's very tightly compact on the cotton part of it. And we're going to run it on the inside of this in the direction that these anti-reverse pins turn. And that way you're turning the anti-reverse pins and you're making sure that you're getting all the dirt and stuff out that's in there all the way around. These pins only turn in one direction, so it's important to clean them in the direction that they turn. All right? Now, once that's done, contrary to popular belief, it is acceptable to lube this bearing. But there's a way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. The wrong way to do it is to put a drop of oil in there, because that's far too much oil. What you want to do is you want to lube and protect these stainless steel pins from corrosion. That's what we always want to do, and oil is what does that. The best way to do it is to, again, take that Q-tip and compress it nice and tight. One drop of oil, and then you're just going to gently rub that in the direction the pins roll. Perfect. Clean and lubed. So let's put this back together and set this aside. This is on the part of the spool shaft bearing, where the tension knob is right here. And again, just everyday maintenance. There's no reason to remove that bearing unless you want to soak it and clean it. And we'll put one drop of oil in that bearing. Okay. Once that's done, we take our cap. And there's the end of the cap. Just go ahead and put a little grease on the threads of your tension cap here. And you can smear a tiny bit of a grease right there in the middle where the actual tension is applied on your spool shaft, on the end of your spool shaft, okay? Now we're down to the gears. Can you guys see that right there? First thing I recommend when you're down to the gears, first thing we want to do is we want to remove these springs, because if not, they can be lost very, very easily. So we remove those springs, and all that spring does is allow the cover to sit on here and gives it enough room for the gears to work. All right. Now this is a very large and very oversized aluminum main drive gear. All right, and underneath here we'll have our braking system. Okay. And all right, so let's start removing stuff and take a look at those brakes, shall we? Slide this gear off. Be careful. There's a very, very small and thin washer right there. We need that to make sure it goes back on top. We can pull these off. Okay, and again, this is where the pads come in. You clear it all clean, dry it, set it down in order. We get to the very large we go. Carbon disc drag. One, you can use the paper towel here and just soak up any oil or grease that's in it. Clean it off, set it aside. Now that's what sits on top of the main drive gear, okay? So you have this oversized carbon drag, and then you have a stainless steel cover. If you remove this drive gear, you'll see that there's a second very large carbon disc drag here. Again, you want to remove that, clean it of any debris, oil and grease, and there will be oil and grease on it if you've used it for any time. Alright, this is the manual anti-reverse, and it works with this little device right here, and it gives you a manual anti-reverse in case your automatic or your bearing anti-reverse bearing should fail. That's all you need to know about that. Again, you remove it, clean it, and we're down now to the white nylon gears. But again, a little bit of grease goes a very long way. Now, if we wanted to, there's a bearing at the bottom, and we're going to remove the shaft. So I can show you that bearing at the bottom, because that bearing sits in a little well at the very bottom of the drive shaft, and all the grease and oil and all the rainwater that comes down through the handles or the shaft ends up in the bottom of this little well down here, and it will foul this bearing. So carefully remove these little screws, and you can pull out the entire drive shaft here. There we go. All right, drive shaft has been removed, and here is the bearing I told you about. And you can, if you look there it is. You'll see that there is the well that the bearing sits in, and here's the bearing. Take it and again put 1 drop of a quality oil in there. So you just clean that all out real well. All right, once you've got that cleaned out, you can remove the pinion gear all the way, and that will expose the bearing that sits inside here. You see it right here. Okay, so what we want to do there is you just take your oil, and again, it's a big bearing, so maybe a drop of oil on each side is fine. You want to take that pinion gear, and you want to make sure that it's clean. Get all the old grease off that pinion gear. And the pinion gear bridge, get all that old grease off. And you just set it back in here, and it's back in place. It's really simple. All right, so what we'll do now is we'll start putting this back together, and as I do that, we're going to show you how to do the lube, because I like to do the grease and everything as I put everything back together. Clean as I disassemble, and as I assemble, I lube and clean as I go. All right, that's a good rule. It works. So first thing we want to do is we're going to replace our drive shaft and bearing. And it's so simple. You just stick it back in the hole. Just goes underneath the clutch plate. This is the black clutch plate here, and now the shaft is in. You want to make sure these screws are tight. They're both the same size. Get your grease and your paintbrush. Here we go. And just gently make sure you put small amounts of grease in between the teeth of the nylon gear. It doesn't take very much at all. Very little is needed. You only need to do one because it'll spread to the other one and give it just the right amount. I like to use red, as you can see in the video, because it tells me where my coverage is and how well I have it covered. That's done. We're going to rebuild the stack. First one that goes on, our anti-reverse cog here. As you can see, that's in place. It's got to sit down flush. We take our small carbon washer, it sits on top like that. Then we put our gear on, and it fits with the brass pinion gear. All right, move on. We've got our large oversized gear. or a carbon disc for braking, and it's stainless steel cover plate. All right, can you see? All right, we replace the springs back on there, and we got this tiny washer that goes on top. All right, so that's basically rebuilt. Now we lube. First thing we want to do is get some more of our grease and make sure that the clutch and clutch arm is well greased. All right, we want to get some grease on these teeth, in between the teeth. You don't want them on the top of the teeth, and the paintbrush is an excellent vehicle for that. Really takes so little amount of grease to spread in these teeth. Perfect. We're at the point now where we're going to replace our side cover. Okay, so we've installed the inner tube roller and the intertube roller bearing, or the shaft bearing. And you simply just carefully slide it on. There you go. The bearing might come up a bit, but you can reseat it easy enough, and the plate will just snap into place. There we go. All right, so the plate is on. All right, now we've already lubed and did the threads. We looped the threads in the bottom. And now let's replace our screws. We put our screws in an order that we know that we go. So the one facing the inside goes on the inside, and we just tighten those up. Put one drop, just a small drop of oil on the threads of the screw, and each one you put in. It's real simple. We do them in order, 1, 2, 3. We talked about it. Again, you want to put that one drop of oil on the threads of each one. There we go. And we can put them all in order, okay? Now the screws have been replaced. They've also been oiled, so it's easier to get them out next time. Again, don't over tighten these screws. They're made of zinc. Now we replace our drag spring washers. Remember, they must be opposing. That's very important. All right, we place them back on and double check to make sure they're opposing. Can you see that they are opposing? I hope you can see that. There you go. And we're going to put on our click washer here. There we go. That's for that clicking that you hear when you turn the star drag. And we have our star drag. Now at this point, I want to take the time to take our grease, again just a small amount, you can barely see it on there, and get the threads of our drive shaft. Again, it's always important that it gets in the threads. Now we're going to take our star drag, and that just screws on. You'll get it down here, you know, the drive shaft will start to turn. Just grab the drive shaft with your fingers, tighten it down a little bit till it seats. Take our convex washer, and it just slides into place there. All right, now comes the handle. We take our handle, place it right here, okay? We take our, remember that tiny little washer? That goes on top now, like that. And we take our nut. Get that nut started. Make sure you do not cross thread this nut, and make sure it goes on nice and smooth before you tighten it down. There you go. Our reel tool, tighten it down. We have a screw, and we'll get this screw on, and the handle will be complete. Okay, done. Now, before we replace the spool, there's a couple things we want to do. All right, one, we take our shaft and we put just a tiny bit, a drop, one drop of oil on the end of the shaft, right there. And we place that shaft inside the pinion gear until it seats properly. You can see it's seated good. Now we take the other end of the shaft, and you're going to put one drop of oil right on the end of that shaft. And then take the non-handle side plate. On this reel, it just snaps into place like that. That's all you got to do. And since we've already lubed the lugs, all we have to do is slide it back. It's pretty easy. This reel is complete. Not a sound. It's beautiful. Solid little reel. It's a real winner by Piscifun. Easy to clean, easy to maintain. Buy it. I think you're really going to enjoy it. The Spark Pro 80. It's a cool little finesse reel.
Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Head on over, check us out on Instagram, and hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you on the water next time.